Vienna, 1906. Just as the bells of Stephansdom tolled midnight, and the Habsburg court slept behind its gilded gates, Caterina Croft didn't look back as she ran. Her silk slippers slapped against the gravel walkways of Schönbrunn Palace, snagged on roots, and tore at the toes, but she kept running. She had traded her tiara for a gray cloak stolen from a scullery maid's peg and tucked her hair beneath a gardener's cap. Her breath came in clouds under the cold spring moon. She fled the palace. The guards would notice by dawn. Her maid, Liesel, would scream, and her father, Archduke Ferdinand's cousin, Duke Emil of Bohemia, would call it treason. That she'd vanished the night before her engagement was announced to all the imperial court would be scandal enough. That she'd left behind a sealed letter rejecting the match? Unforgivable. Caterina didn't care. The palace had never felt like home. It was a cage of brocade and protocol, and she'd spent 20 years doing what was expected, curtsying, smiling, obeying. Now she ran on scraped feet toward the only place she'd ever seen life bloom without permission, the imperial gardens. Beyond the hedge maze, past the fountain of Neptune, there was a greenhouse kept locked to all but a few. She had watched it for months from her window, and she had watched the man who tended it. He was not a courtier, not even a servant in livery. He wore plain linen shirts and boots caked in soil, and he spoke to the roses like they were royalty themselves. Caterina had never spoken to him, but she saw how he moved, how he knelt to pull weeds with care, how he smiled only when he thought he was alone. She reached the glass house just as her legs gave out. She stumbled against the door, catching herself on the frame. A low voice came from within. "You're not supposed to be here." She looked up. He was there, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands streaked with earth. His hair was dark, curling at his temples. He did not look surprised, only wary. "I know," she said, breathless. "Please, don't send me back." He stepped closer, and the moonlight caught the sharp lines of his jaw. "You're one of them." "I was. Not anymore." He studied her eyes, the color of river stone, steady and unreadable. Then, wordlessly, he opened the door wider. She stepped inside. The warmth of the greenhouse wrapped around her, thick with the scent of jasmine and soil. She sank to a wooden bench, hiding her shaking hands in the folds of her cloak. He didn't speak again until he'd poured water into a tin mug and handed it to her. "I'm Nathaniel Ward," he said. "I take care of these gardens. And I don't harbor runaways." "I'm not asking you to," she whispered. "Just let me stay until morning." Nathaniel looked at her, then toward the palace, its great dome barely visible over the hedges. "You've got until dawn," he said. Caterina slept curled on the bench, and when she woke to the clatter of watering cans, the sun was rising. She sat up, heart pounding, expecting shouts, boots, pursuit. But there was only Nathaniel, trimming the dead leaves off a fig tree. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said without looking at her. "I didn't think you'd let me be." He set down his shears and turned. "You've got dirt on your cheek," he said. Caterina wiped it with the heel of her hand, flushing. "I'm not afraid to be dirty. Not what I expected from a palace girl. I'm not a palace girl anymore." Nathaniel didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a small spade. "You want to stay? Earn it. The roses don't prune themselves." She stared at the tool. "You're giving me a second chance?" "I'm not giving anything." His voice was even. "But if you want to make something of yourself, this is a place to start." Caterina took the spade. Her hands were soft and untrained. But she knelt beside him and began to dig. By noon, her hair clung to her neck and her dress was ruined. Nathaniel didn't speak much, but when she misjudged the soil depth and tore a root, he placed his hand over hers. "Gentle," he said. She froze. His touch was warm, firm. She looked up, and he was closer than he'd been all morning. Their eyes held. Neither moved. Then he pulled back. "You've got a lot to learn." "I'm willing." The afternoon passed in silence. They worked side by side, and Caterina felt her heartbeat adjust to the rhythm of pruning, watering, tending. It was nothing like the life she left, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel watched. When dusk painted the glass in amber, Nathaniel finally spoke. "You can't stay here forever. I know. You'll need a name. Yours will draw attention." "Clara," she said after a beat. "Clara is fine." "Clara what?" "Clara Croft." He nodded once. That night, she slept in the storage shed behind the greenhouse, wrapped in an old gardener's coat. Nathaniel brought her bread and cheese, then left without a word. The next morning, he handed her a broom. "You want to keep hiding? You earn your keep," he said. And so, Clara swept paths, lifted flower trays, and learned the names of the plants. She ate with the workers, kept her head down, and listened. Days turned into a week. One morning, Nathaniel found her humming softly as she watered the geraniums. "You're not very good at blending in," he said. "I'm not trying to blend. I'm trying to live." He smiled just a flicker. "You're doing better than most." That night, rain fell hard. Clara stood at the edge of the greenhouse, watching the sky break open. Nathaniel stepped beside her. "I've never seen a storm from this side of the glass," she said. He offered her his coat. She shook her head. Then he held up a shared umbrella. They stood shoulder to shoulder, the umbrella barely covering them both, and watched the rain soak the garden. "I should hate you," Nathaniel said, voice low. "You're everything I've never been allowed to touch." She looked at him. "Then touch me." His hand brushed hers. And he did. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. But it was a start. And somewhere, deep in the palace, the guards began asking questions. A letter had been found. A name was whispered down marble halls. But Clara didn't hear it. She was in the garden, learning how to live. The frost came early that year. By the second week, the breath of morning left silver across the glass panes of the greenhouse, and the soil hardened under Nathaniel's boots. Clara's hands, chapped and pink, struggled to grip the pruning shears, but she didn't complain. She merely pulled her sleeves lower and worked until her fingertips stung. Nathaniel watched her from a distance as she gathered the last of the calendula before they wilted in the cold. Her movements, once tentative, had grown deliberate. She no longer flinched at the branch's resistance or blinked at the sting of wind in her eyes. "You favor the calendula," he said as he approached, nodding toward the bundle. "They're stubborn," she answered, tying the stalks with twine. "They refuse to die quietly." He crouched beside her, brushing a layer of frost from the edge of a wooden crate. "That's not a reason most people like a flower." "I'm not most people." He glanced at her hands, the skin rough at the knuckles. "You should wear gloves. They slow me down." Nathaniel didn't argue. Instead, he opened the crate and began laying out the herbs they'd gathered earlier: anise, thyme, and the last sprigs of lemon balm. He worked silently until Clara broke the quiet. "Do they ever ask about me?" He didn't look up. "The guards were here 2 days ago. They questioned the staff." Her breath caught. "Did they find anything?" "No." She folded her arms. "And if they come again?" "They will." The silence that followed was thick. She tucked the calendula under her arm and stood. "Would you turn me in?" she asked. He straightened slowly. "You're not a thief. Or a spy. You walked away. That doesn't matter to them. It matters to me." The words settled between them, not soft, but steady. Clara's gaze searched his. He didn't look away. Later that evening, he found her sitting by the brazier in the tool shed, her knees drawn up beneath one of the old wool blankets. She was oiling the hinges on a broken lantern, her face lit orange by the flame. He stepped inside and leaned against the doorframe. "There's a man in the city," he said. "He prints false documents. For people who need to disappear." Clara set down the lantern. "How do you know him?" "He helped my brother leave Bohemia after the strikes. There was trouble." She picked at a thread on the blanket. "And you'd trust him with me?" "I'd trust him to keep his mouth shut." She considered that. "What name would you give me this time?" "You'd choose it." Her eyes returned to the flickering brazier. "I never thought I'd be the one rewriting myself." "You're not. You're just deciding what gets remembered." She looked up. "And what if I don't want to disappear?" Nathaniel stepped forward slowly, letting the door shut behind him. "Then we find another way." The brazier cracked softly. Rain tapped against the roof. "Do you think they'd forgive me?" she asked. "If I returned?" "No." Clara nodded once, as if she had expected as much. Her shoulders sank, not in defeat, but in understanding. "Tell me about your brother," she said. Nathaniel hesitated, then pulled a chair beside her. "He was a blacksmith. Spoke too loudly at the wrong meetings. They arrested 6 of them. He escaped to Trieste. Do you write? He doesn't know my name anymore." We both agreed. Clara didn't ask why. She simply reached for the lantern again and handed it to him. "Fix the wick. It's crooked." He took it, their fingers brushing. She didn't flinch. Neither did he. By the end of the week, the first snow fell. The gardens lay under a pale hush, and the greenhouse became a world unto itself, warm, enclosed, breathing with life the earth outside had forgotten. Nathaniel taught her how to coax basil from seed in winter, how to graft a rose stem with precision. They spoke little as they worked, yet the air between them felt full. One night, as the wind howled against the glass, Clara woke to find her cot cold. She gathered the blanket around her shoulders and stepped into the greenhouse. Nathaniel was there, lantern in hand, inspecting a row of fig cuttings. "You don't sleep much," she said. "Some nights it's better not to try." She moved beside him, the hem of her gown brushing the straw-covered floor. "Was it always like this?" she asked. "Your life before?" "Quieter, but not easier." He gave a slow nod. "No." She turned to face him. "Do you ever miss anything?" He looked at her, really looked, as though seeing her not as Clara the runaway, but as someone else entirely. "I miss the idea that things could be simple." She stepped closer. "And do you still believe that?" Nathaniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was rough, warm, steady. Clara leaned into the touch. "You're trembling," he said. "It's not from the cold." And then, at last, he kissed her. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was the kind of kiss that came only when silence had said all it could. When two people, shaped by days of unspoken truths and quiet labor, finally let their hearts speak. Outside, the snow fell heavier. Inside, the warmth held. Neither pulled away. By late December, the greenhouse roof groaned beneath the weight of snow. The days narrowed. Morning light came blue and sharp, slipping through the panes in angled ribbons. Nathaniel had begun waking earlier, lighting the iron stove before sunrise so the seedlings wouldn't freeze. Clara stirred shortly after, never needing to be called. She'd begun to move through the space with unspoken understanding, watering before asked, trimming where needed, fetching the sacks of peat from the storage room without prompting. That morning, she stood ankle-deep in straw, pinning burlap wraps around the lemon trees. Nathaniel was balancing on a short ladder nearby, reinforcing the beam above the southern windows with a length of cedar. He glanced down as Clara adjusted the ties on the canvas with gloved hands. "You've learned to knot like a carpenter," he said, voice low over the hammer's rhythm. "I copied yours." She pulled the final cord tight. "You loop twice, then hold the tension with your elbow. It lasts longer that way." He stepped down, shaking the sawdust from his sleeves. "I was taught by a man who mended sails. Said the wind respects a knot that remembers how it was made." Clara brushed a curl from her brow, leaving a smudge of pine resin behind. "Did you ever want to sail?" "I thought about it," he said. "The sea doesn't care for names or papers. It just wants you to keep your footing." She leaned against the bench, watching the frost creep slowly along the outer glass. "Would you have gone alone?" "I didn't have anyone to take with me." Clara didn't speak. Nathaniel lowered his gaze, then moved to the stove, nudging the coals. "There's a man arriving from Trieste tomorrow. He brings the seed catalogs for spring. But he also carries things that don't belong in ink." Clara's shoulders tensed. "You mean papers?" He nodded once. "He'll come at dawn. I've arranged for you to meet him, if you want it." She turned toward the window, watching a squirrel scramble along the bare hedges. "He'll ask questions. He'll write answers instead." Her voice was quiet. "I don't want to build another lie." Nathaniel stood beside her. "Then don't. Choose something that's true, even if it's only true now." That night, she stayed in the greenhouse after he left, kneeling beside the cypress cuttings and brushing her fingertips across the waxy stems. The kerosene lamp above her hissed softly. She opened the ledger Nathaniel used for planting notes and tore out a blank page. Folding it once, she wrote a single name across its center. She tucked it into her coat and returned to the shed. At dawn, the man arrived. He was older than Clara expected, heavy-set with a limp in his left leg and a voice that rasped like gravel. He didn't introduce himself. He simply handed Nathaniel a cloth bag of seed pouches and turned to Clara. "You've put down roots," he said without a smile. "I've learned to tend them," she replied. He opened a small wooden case, revealing a sheaf of parchment, a penknife, and a pot of ink. "You're certain?" She unfolded the paper she'd written and placed it in front of him. He read the name, then looked up. "You'll need somewhere to go." "I'm not going," she said. The man raised an eyebrow. "Then what's the name for?" "So I can stay," she said, "with something of my own." Nathaniel remained silent as the man filled in the documents. When he sealed them with wax and handed the packet to Clara, she didn't flinch. "You'll own nothing," the man said. "But if you're found, I won't know you." "I'll know myself," Clara said. The man left without farewell. Nathaniel leaned against the doorway once he was gone, arms crossed. "What did you choose?" he asked. She slipped the packet beneath the seed ledger. "Clara Linden." He tilted his head. "Why Linden?" "There was a tree in the palace garden," she said. "The one place I was never watched. I used to sit under it and wonder what the world looked like on the other side." He stepped toward her, his boots muffled by the straw. "And now, I'm on the other side," she said. "And I want to stay." Nathaniel reached for her hand. His thumb brushed the knuckles, rough from winter work. "Then stay." She didn't answer in words. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his chest, and he held her close, his hand at the back of her neck, steady. The garden slept beneath snow, but inside, warmth took root. By January's midpoint, the river froze. The Danube, once a ribbon of movement beyond the palace walls, stilled beneath a sheath of ice. At sunrise, smoke lifted in pale spirals from the staff quarters, and the gardens lay hushed beneath their weight of snow. The greenhouse, however, pulsed with a steadier rhythm fed by breath, heat, and quiet labor. Clara had begun keeping her own notes in the margins of the seed ledger. Her script was narrow and deliberate, pressed between Nathaniel's broader scrawl. She never disturbed his entries, but she added observations, a change in leaf color, a root's resistance, a pattern in how the light shifted across the northern wall. That morning, Nathaniel found her seated cross-legged beneath the trellised wall, a folded square of muslin in her lap. She was stitching a row of initials into the corner. "CL? You're marking your apron now?" His tone was careful, not mocking. "I borrowed it long enough," she said. "It didn't feel right not to make it mine." He crouched beside her, brushing soil from his knees. "You never told me what your mother was like." Clara paused, the needle held midair. "She was born in Naples." Her voice always carried salt in it. "I think she missed the sea more than she missed her homeland." "She never learned German?" She refused. Said it flattened her tongue. Nathaniel leaned against the wall. "Did she teach you Italian?" "Only when we were alone." Clara's voice softened. "She made me promise not to speak it at court. Said it made me sound too alive." Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. A gust of wind moaned against the glass. "Then, is that why you never speak of her?" "She died when I was 12, Clara said, threading the needle again. "Too young to understand what silence was meant to protect. Too old to forget." Nathaniel reached for a nearby pot and began loosening the soil around a lemon sapling. "Did she ever see the gardens?" Clara shook her head. She wasn't allowed in that part of the palace. But she kept rosemary on the windowsill. Said it remembered everything. They worked in silence after that. The snow outside thickened, muting the distant clatter of carts in the city. When the bells from St. Ulrich's rang too, Nathaniel rolled his sleeves and crossed to the bench near the stove, where he'd kept a folded map tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Clara watched as he smoothed it out across the table. "What are you looking for?" He pointed to a narrow stretch south of the city, near the Hungarian border. "There's a monastery here. Abandoned after the war. My uncle used to harvest wild chamomile from the fields behind it. Said the soil never forgot what it once grew." Clara stepped closer. "You think it's still standing?" "Only one way to know." She glanced at the door. "It's more than a day's walk." "There's a train from Meidling," he said. "If we leave early, we can be there before dusk." Clara hesitated. "And if someone recognizes me?" "You're not the only woman with dark hair and a false name." She traced the edge of the map. "Why now?" "Because spring's not far," he said. "If we're going to plant something of our own, we need to start soon." Her hand stilled. "You mean to leave Schönbrunn?" "I mean to build something no one can take from you." His voice was steady, but not hard. Clara looked down at her stitched initials, the thread still warm from her fingers. Then she folded the cloth once and tucked it into her coat. "When? 3 mornings from now." She didn't ask what they would do if someone stopped them. She didn't ask where they'd sleep, or how they'd carry tools, or whether the monastery would have walls left standing. Instead, she reached for a packet of dried sage and began wrapping it in oilcloth. That night, she packed only what she could carry: the seed ledger, the stitched apron, and a folded page from her mother's hymn book. Nathaniel brought a canvas satchel of tools, a jar of preserved pears, and an iron key he'd once used on the palace garden gates. They said nothing of farewells. No one in the staff quarters asked questions. The workers had long learned the value of silence in a place where names could be currency or curse. At dawn, they slipped through the carriage gate, walking beneath the still bare lindens. The snow cracked beneath their boots, and the sky broke open with a pale gold that caught in Clara's hair. She did not look back. Nathaniel held her gloved hand inside his. Neither spoke until they reached the frozen road that led toward Meadling. Then Clara said, "What grows after frost?" Nathaniel's thumb brushed hers once. Anything with a root strong enough to wait. And so they walked, side by side, toward the monastery, toward a garden not yet sown, toward a life that would carry their names, not despite what they had fled, but because they had, together,